The transport's engine rattled as it crossed another stretch of cracked earth. Roy Hansen wiped sweat from his forehead and checked the fuel gauge again. 3 more days of this endless desert before he reached Cornerstone Settlement. The Bitter Flats lived up to their name in every miserable way possible. He had been driving cargo trucks for 6 years now. Earth to colony worlds, settlement to settlement, always alone. That was how he liked it after leaving the military. No orders, no complications, just him, his rig, and whatever needed moving from point A to point B. The radio crackled with static. Roy adjusted the dial, but found nothing except empty channels. Out here in the deep desert, even emergency broadcasts rarely reached through. He was about to switch it off when he heard something else. Not static, not mechanical. Crying. Roy slowed the transport and listened. There it was again. High-pitched. Desperate. Definitely biological. He stopped completely and killed the engine. The sound came from somewhere off to the east, near a cluster of red rocks jutting from the sand. Probably some desert animal, he muttered to himself. But the crying continued, weaker now. Something about it made his chest tight. He had heard plenty of sounds in war. This one reminded him of those. The sound of something dying alone. Roy grabbed his canteen and climbed down from the cab. Heat hit him like a physical wall. The sand reflected sunlight in blinding waves. He pulled his hat lower and walked toward the rocks. The crying grew louder, more frantic. Behind the largest boulder, half buried in red sand, lay a tiny creature. Roy stopped and stared. He recognized it immediately from the colony briefings. A Dreven hatchling, reptilian body covered in scales. Small wings folded against its back. But something was wrong with this one, that its scales were pure white. Roy knelt beside it. The hatchling's eyes opened slowly. Pale blue, clouded with pain. Its mouth opened in another weak cry. The little creature was dying. Sunburned skin showed through gaps in its scales. Dehydration had sunken its eyes. Red dust coated everything. Easy there, Roy said softly. He knew about the Dreven and their traditions. He knew what white scales meant to them. Cursed, abandoned, left to die in sacred places. This hatchling had been thrown away like garbage. The creature looked at him. Something in those dying eyes hit Roy harder than he expected. Recognition maybe, or just the last desperate hope of any living thing that didn't want to die alone. A small clawed hand reached toward him, trembling. Roy made his decision in that moment. He scooped up the hatchling as gently as possible and wrapped it in his cooling vest. The little thing was burning up despite its cold-blooded nature. He hurried back to the transport. Inside the cab, Roy activated the climate control and set it cooler. The hatchling lay on the passenger seat, barely moving. He grabbed his emergency medical kit and found the water dropper he used for radiator checks. He filled it from his canteen and carefully squeezed drops into the creature's mouth. First, nothing happened. Then the hatchling's tongue moved. It swallowed. Roy gave it more water, slowly, carefully. The little creature drank desperately, its body shaking with effort. After several minutes, the frantic edge left its breathing. That's it, Roy encouraged. Small sips. You're okay now. He had no idea if that was true. He had no idea how to care for a Dreven hatchling. But he couldn't leave it to die. His human conscience wouldn't allow it, regardless of alien traditions or local laws. Roy pulled out a supply blanket and created a makeshift nest in the footwell of the passenger side. The hatchling was too weak to move much, but its eyes tracked him constantly. When he placed it in the blanket nest, the creature made a small sound. Not crying anymore. Something softer. Guess you need a name, Roy said. He looked at the pure white scales. How about pale? Simple enough. The hatchling blinked slowly. Roy took that as agreement. He pulled out a protein bar from his supplies and broke off a tiny piece. He wasn't sure if Dreven ate solid food this young, but it was worth trying. He held the piece near Pale's mouth. The hatchling sniffed it, then took it carefully between tiny teeth. It chewed slowly and swallowed. Good, Roy said. We'll figure this out together. He restarted the engine and pulled back onto the desert track. The cargo he carried could wait. Finding proper care for Pale was more important. He adjusted the climate controls again, making sure the temperature stayed comfortable for his new passenger. Pale made another small sound and curled tighter into the blanket. For the first time since Roy found it, the hatchling seemed almost peaceful. The crying had stopped completely. Roy drove on through the desert, his mind already working through problems. He was carrying an abandoned Dreven hatchling, an albino one. That made him a criminal by Dreven law. But it also made him the only thing standing between this little creature and certain death that he glanced down at Pale. The hatchling's eyes were closed now, breathing steady. Something protective stirred in Roy's chest. He had been alone for 6 years by choice. Maybe that was about to change. 6 days to Cornerstone, he told the sleeping hatchling. 6 days to figure out what happens next. The transport rumbled across the bitter flats, carrying cargo, a driver, and one impossible passenger toward an uncertain future. Pale grew stronger each day on the road. What started as desperate water drops became regular feeding times. Roy learned quickly that Dreven hatchlings ate almost anything protein-based. His emergency rations worked fine, though he suspected fresh meat would be better by the second day. Pale could stand on wobbly legs. The hatchling followed Roy everywhere with clumsy determination. When he stepped out to check the cargo straps, Pale cried until he returned. When he ate, Pale sat beside him and chirped hopefully. The little creature had imprinted completely. Roy found himself talking to Pale constantly, explaining what he was doing, describing the desert they crossed, telling stories from his military days. Pale seemed to listen, tilting its head at certain words. Those pale blue eyes tracked everything with obvious intelligence. "You're smarter than you should be," Roy said during their third evening together. Pale chirped in response and climbed onto his lap, curling up like a cat. The white scales had brightened significantly. Proper food and water were working miracles, but Roy's peace couldn't last forever. On the fourth day, his radio crackled to life with actual voices. Trading chatter between settlements. Market prices for ore. Weather reports. Then something else caught his attention. Dreven clan asking about stolen property. A voice said, "White-scaled hatchling, last seen near the flats. Offering reward for information." Roy turned the volume down and looked at Pale. The hatchling was playing with a piece of rope, completely innocent of the danger. Stolen property. They were calling a living being property. He reached Cornerstone Settlement late that afternoon. The place was typical for frontier colonies. Prefabricated buildings arranged around a central hub. Mining equipment everywhere. Humans, Dreven, and a few other species moving through dusty streets. Roy parked at the cargo depot and left Pale hidden in the cab with strict instructions to stay quiet. The hatchlings seemed to understand, curling up in the blanket nest without protest. The delivery went smoothly until Roy spotted Lucia Mendez near the depot office. She was a xenobiologist he had worked with before. Smart woman with more knowledge about alien species than anyone else on Redstone. If anyone could help, she could. Roy. Lucia smiled when she saw him. "Long time. How was the crossing?" "Complicated," Roy admitted. He glanced around and lowered his voice. "Need to talk to you. Privately." Lucia's smile faded. She nodded and led him to a quiet corner behind the storage units. Roy explained everything. The crying in the desert. Finding Pale. The choice he made. "You kept an albino Dreven hatchling." Lucia's eyes went wide. "Roy, do you understand what you've done?" "Saved a life," Roy said firmly. "You've made yourself a criminal in Dreven law," Lucia countered. She ran a hand through her hair, thinking. The white scales are considered cursed. Bad luck. Death omens. Traditional Dreven law requires they be abandoned in sacred places to die. It's been that way for thousands of years. "That's murder," Roy said. "That's their culture," Lucia replied. "And you violated it. The clan that abandoned Pale has legal standing to demand its return." "They can demand all they want," Roy said. "I'm not giving Pale back to die." Lucia studied him for a long moment. Then she sighed. "Let me see the hatchling." They returned to Roy's transport together. Pale was exactly where Roy had left it, waiting patiently. When the hatchling saw Roy, it chirped happily and rushed to him. Roy scooped it up and Pale nuzzled against his chest. "This is Pale," Roy said. Lucia approached slowly. She examined Pale with professional interest, checking scales, eyes, wing development. Pale tolerated the inspection, but kept one clawed hand gripped on Roy's shirt. "Healthy," Lucia finally said. "Thriving, actually. You've done good work caring for it." She stepped back. "But Roy, this isn't going to be simple. Dreven merchants are in town right now. If they catch Pale's scent, then I'll deal with it," Roy said, as if summoned by the conversation. Voices approached. Roy recognized Dreven's speech. He quickly tucked Pale inside his jacket. The hatchling stayed perfectly still. Understanding the danger, somehow, .3 Dreven merchants rounded the corner. Tall reptilian forms, covered in scales of green and bronze. They stopped when they saw Roy and Lucia. One of them sniffed the air. Its eyes narrowed. Human, it said in accented standard language. You carry something. Something that smells like clan property. I'm carrying cargo, Roy said calmly. Mining equipment. All documented. Not equipment, the Dreven insisted. Something living. Young, let me inspect your vehicle. No, Roy said. The Dreven took a step forward. I have right under trade law to verify cargo. Not under human law, Lucia interjected. This is a human-registered transport. Privacy rights apply. You need a warrant from the settlement administrator for inspection. The three Dreven exchanged looks. The lead one hissed softly. The cursed one should be dead. If someone has interfered, then you can file a complaint through proper channels, Lucia said firmly. But you're not searching this transport without authorization. The standoff lasted several tense seconds. Finally, the Dreven backed down. But the lead merchant pointed at Roy. This is not finished, human. The cursed ones bring death. You keep it. You bring death to all around you. They left. Roy exhaled slowly and pulled Pale from his jacket. The hatchling was trembling. They'll report this, Lucia said quietly. You need to make a decision, Roy. Return Pale and walk away clean. Or commit fully and face the consequences. Roy looked down at Pale. The hatchling looked back with complete trust. Those pale blue eyes held no understanding of curses or traditions. Only the certainty that Roy would protect it. I already decided, Roy said. In the desert. I'm keeping Pale. Lucia nodded slowly. Then we need to make it legal. Follow me. They went to the settlement administrator's office. Roy filed formal adoption papers under Earth Coalition law. It took 2 hours and most of his savings for processing fees. But when they finished, Pale was legally his dependent. His responsibility under human law. Walking back to his transport that evening, Roy carried Pale openly for the first time. The hatchling sat on his shoulder, looking around at everything with wonder. We're family now, Roy told it. Whatever happens next, we face it together. Pale chirped and nuzzled his neck. In that moment, Roy knew he had made the right choice. Legal or not, traditional or not. Sometimes doing right meant standing against everyone else that he just hoped they both survived what came next. 6 months changed everything. Pale grew from a tiny hatchling that fit in Roy's hands to a young Dreven the size of a large dog. The white scales gleamed like polished ivory. Wings that once seemed useless now stretched wide enough to create shade. And most remarkably, Pale could talk. Roy, the young Dreven said from the passenger seat. Why does fuel gauge drop faster when we climb hills? Because the engine works harder against gravity, Roy explained. Uses more fuel for the same distance. Pale considered this. Gravity is constant. Engine output must increase. Therefore, fuel consumption increases proportionally to grade angle and cargo weight. Roy smiled. Pale's intelligence had surpassed every expectation. The young Dreven learned languages effortlessly, now speaking 3 human dialects plus native Dreven. Mathematics came naturally. Navigation seemed instinctive. Pale could calculate optimal routes faster than the transport's computer. You're too smart for your own good, Roy said affectionately. Cannot be too intelligent, Pale replied seriously. Intelligence is survival advantage. You taught me that. They were 3 days from Cornerstone when everything went wrong. Roy's transport had become famous across the colony network. The human driver with the white dragon. Other drivers requested his routes, claiming cargo arrived safer when Pale rode along. The young Dreven had an uncanny sense for mechanical problems, alerting Roy to issues before they became critical. But fame brought attention. And attention brought consequences. The Dreven delegation arrived at Cornerstone with formal demands. 7 clan elders, scales dark with age and authority. They waited at the settlement hub when Roy pulled in for his regular supply run. Pale sensed the danger immediately, pressing close to Roy's side. The human Roy Hansen, the lead elder said. We come to address the abomination situation. Pale has a name, Roy said coldly. Use it. The cursed one has no name in clan law, the elder continued. It should have died in the sacred place. Your interference violated ancient tradition. We demand its return for proper ritual death. Absolutely not, Roy said. Another elder stepped forward. We offer generous compensation. 50,000 credits. Legal protection from any consequences. All we ask is the cursed one's return. Pale is not for sale, Roy said. And Pale is my family. Not property. Not a thing. Family. Pale's clawed hand gripped Roy's shirt. The young Dreven was trembling but stayed silent. Understanding this was Roy's fight to have. The lead elder's eyes narrowed. You claim family with an abomination? You doom yourself and everyone near you. Every white scale in our history has brought disaster. Plague, famine, death. We do not kill them from cruelty, human. We do it to protect the species. Then your history is wrong, Roy said. Pale has brought nothing but good everywhere we've gone. Show me one disaster, one plague, one death that Pale caused. The disasters come, the elder insisted. They always come. Better to prevent than to suffer. That's superstition, not fact, a new voice interjected. Lucia pushed through the crowd that had gathered. I've monitored Pale for 6 months. Run full medical scans. There is nothing dangerous about albino Dreven. Nothing cursed. It's just genetics. Your science does not understand our history, another elder said. And your history doesn't understand your science. Lucia shot back. She held up a datapad. I've documented everything. Pale's development, health markers, social integration. The only threat here is your outdated superstition. The settlement administrator arrived, flanked by security personnel. This is human territory, she announced. Human law applies. Roy Hansen has legal custody of Pale under Earth Coalition law. Unless you have evidence of actual harm, your demands have no standing here. The elders conferred in rapid Dreven. Their body language showed anger and frustration. Finally, the lead elder turned back to Roy. We cannot force this, it admitted. But know this, human. You have made an enemy of our clans. When disaster comes, and it will come, the blood will be on your hands. Every death, every sorrow, because you were too arrogant to respect wisdom older than your species. They left. The crowd dispersed slowly. Roy stood in the dusty street with Pale pressed against his leg. The young Dreven looked up at him with worried eyes. Did I cause this? Pale asked quietly. Would everyone be safer if I died? Roy knelt down and put both hands on Pale's scale shoulders. Listen to me. You're not a curse. You're not bad luck. You're a living being with thoughts and feelings and rights. What they believe doesn't change what you are. But what if they're right? Pale's voice shook. What if I do bring disaster? Then we'll face it together, Roy said firmly. But I don't believe it. I believe you're exactly what you seem to be. Smart, kind, and valuable. Don't let their fear define you. Pale leaned into Roy's embrace. Other humans in the settlement approached, offering support. Many had come to know Pale over the months. The young Dreven had helped repair vehicles, taught children mathematics, even located a lost child in the desert using superior tracking skills. That evening, Roy and Pale sat on a ridge overlooking the settlement. Stars filled the sky above. Pale's wings were spread wide, catching the cooling breeze. I researched, Pale said quietly. Found records of 14 other albino Dreven in history. All killed as hatchlings. All blamed for disasters. What kind of disasters? Roy asked. Different every time, Pale said. Crop failures. Equipment breakdowns. Accidents. But always after the white scale was killed. Not during their life. After. Roy sat up straighter. So the disasters happened anyway. Yes, Pale said. The pattern is random. Disasters happen with or without albino Dreven. But confirmation bias makes them remember only the ones that fit the curse narrative. That's important, Roy said. That's evidence the curse is fake. The archivists might investigate. Pale said hopefully. They're neutral. If we could get them to study the history objectively, then we have proof, Roy finished. He pulled out his communicator. Let's send them a request. Official. Documented. Let science answer this once and for all. Pale's tail swished hopefully. You think they'll help? Only one way to find out, Roy said. He composed the message carefully. Request for historical analysis. Offer to submit Pale for study. Proposal for objective investigation of the curse claim. He sent it to the archivist's central database and waited 0.3 days later, the response came. The archivists agreed. They would conduct a full investigation. 3 months of study. Both Pale and Dreven historical records would be examined. This is it, Roy told Pale. This is how we prove the truth. Pale looked nervous but determined. Together, always together, Roy promised. They prepared for the hardest 3 months of their lives. The archivist facility was cold and clinical. Pale had been poked, scanned, tested, and questioned for 8 weeks straight. Roy stayed close through everything, but even his presence couldn't ease the strain showing in Pale's eyes. Blood sample today, the lead archivist said. Its species was insectoid, with compound eyes that revealed nothing. Then cognitive battery 17. Then historical interview session. How much longer? Roy asked. For more weeks, the archivist replied. Thoroughness requires time. Pale submitted to the blood draw without complaint. The young Dreven had grown during the study period, now the size of a small horse. Intelligence tests consistently showed results 40% above average Dreven baseline. The archivist seemed fascinated by this. Do all albinos show enhanced cognition? One researcher asked during an interview session. Unknown, Pale replied tiredly. Sample size of 1. All others were killed at birth. The researcher made notes without emotion. The genetic analysis suggests the albino trait cluster includes several cognitive enhancement markers. Preliminary conclusion is that albinism in Dreven correlates with increased intelligence. Roy felt sick. You mean they've been killing their smartest children for 10,000 years? That is one interpretation of the data, the archivist confirmed. The historical research revealed even more disturbing patterns. The ancient plague that started the cursed belief occurred during pre-spaceflight Dreven civilization. An albino hatchling was born in a major city. 3 months later, a plague outbreak killed thousands. The connection became embedded in cultural memory. But there were 73 other albino births in the 1,000 years before that plague. The archivist explained to Roy and Pale during a briefing. None coincided with disasters. The selective memory bias is significant. So one coincidence created 10,000 years of murder, Roy said. Essentially correct, the archivist agreed, but not all Dreven accepted these findings. Traditional clans rejected the research as human manipulation. The cultural divide within Dreven society grew wider. Young Dreven intellectuals demanded reform. Elders doubled down on tradition. Then the radicals came. Roy and Pale were walking back to their temporary quarters when 6 Dreven in traditional clan markings blocked their path. Roy recognized the hatred in their eyes immediately. The cursed one ends tonight, their leader said, before more damage is done to our people. Back off, Roy warned. His hand moved to his sidearm. You cannot protect it forever, human, the Dreven said. Our ancestors demand this death. They attacked. Roy drew his weapon, but Pale moved faster. The young Dreven's tail whipped out, catching one attacker across the chest. Wings spread wide in a dominance display. A deep growl rumbled from Pale's throat, nothing like the gentle creature Roy knew. Stay back, Pale snarled. I will not die for your superstition. 2 attackers lunged. Pale's claws raked across scales, drawing blood. Roy fired twice into the air, the shots echoing through the facility. Alarms blared. Security forces rushed in. The fight ended as quickly as it started, but damage was done. 3 attackers were injured. Roy had a gash across his shoulder. Pale's wing membrane was torn. They stood together, backs against a wall, both bleeding. The aftermath was chaos. Dreven leadership demanded extradition. Earth Coalition refused. The incident became galactic news. Human protects alien abomination with violence. Traditional values versus human interference. Political crisis between species. Roy sat in medical while they stitched his shoulder. Pale was in the next room, getting the wing membrane repaired. Lucia came to check on them both. This is getting dangerous, she said. Maybe you should consider no, Roy said flatly. Don't even suggest it. Roy, people want Pale dead. They tried to kill both of you. And they failed, Roy said. Because we're stronger together than they expected. Pale entered, wing bandaged, but functional. The young Dreven looked shaken, but unharmed otherwise. Roy stood and pulled Pale into a careful hug. I hurt them, Pale said quietly. I use claws. Drew blood. Does that make me the monster they claim? That makes you someone who refused to die, Roy said. Self-defense isn't murder. You protected yourself. You protected us both. But violence is sometimes necessary, Roy finished. I wish it wasn't. But I'm glad you could defend yourself. I'm glad you fought back. Pale's tail wrapped around Roy's leg, seeking comfort. I don't want to be what they fear. Then don't be, Roy said. Be what you are. Smart, kind, brave. Show them their fear is wrong by living well. The archivists accelerated their timeline after the attack. Within 2 weeks, they had enough data for preliminary conclusions. They called a formal presentation attended by representatives from multiple species, including both human and Dreven leadership. The lead archivist presented findings with clinical precision. No causal link between albino Dreven and disasters. Historical pattern analysis showed random distribution of catastrophes. The curse was cultural trauma, not biological reality. The albino gene cluster included cognitive enhancements that made white-scale Dreven potentially more valuable, not less. Recommendation. The archivist concluded. immediate cessation of infanticide practices regarding albino-driven, implementation of protection laws, cultural education programs to address historical trauma. The Driven delegation erupted in argument. Traditional elders shouted over reformist representatives. Human observers watched the species confront 10,000 years of unnecessary death. One young Driven stepped forward. I am keeper of records for the northern clans, she said. I have reviewed the evidence. It is conclusive. We have been wrong. Terribly, horrifically wrong. We have killed children who could have been our greatest minds. I call for immediate reform. The debate raged for hours. Finally, a vote was called. By narrow margin, Driven leadership agreed to implement the archivist recommendations. Albino hatchlings will be protected by law. Traditional clans who refused would face sanctions. Roy and Pale watched from the gallery. When the vote concluded, Pale's whole body relaxed. It's over, Pale whispered. They'll stop killing us. The ones born from now on, Roy said gently. But 14 others died before you. Remember them. Always, Pale promised. That night, they received a message. 5 albino-driven hatchlings had been secretly saved by reformist families. They were alive because Pale lived, because Roy had stopped in the desert, because one human refused to let tradition override compassion. 5 lives, Pale said, reading the message. Because you saved one. Because you were worth saving, Roy corrected. Never forget that. Pale leaned against him, exhausted but hopeful. The fight wasn't completely over, but they had won the most important battle. The right to exist. The right to live without fear. Together, they had changed history. 1 year after the archivist verdict, Pale had grown into a fully mature Driven. Wings strong enough for sustained flight. Intelligence that impressed even the most skeptical observers. Roy watched with pride as Pale navigated their transport through a difficult canyon route, calculating angles and wind shear without computer assistance. Approach vector optimal, Pale announced. Should clear the narrows with 15 meters margin. Show off, Roy said with a grin. Accurate assessment is not showing off, Pale replied, but Roy caught the pleased tone. They worked together seamlessly now. Roy handled the business side, while Pale managed logistics and navigation. Their company had expanded. Wide-scale transport employed 12 people across 3 vehicles. And most importantly, it provided work for the rescued albino-driven .6 white-scaled youngsters now lived openly. The 5 saved during the verdict period, plus 1 more discovered by reformist Driven who refused to let tradition dictate death. All 6 apprenticed with Pale, learning navigation, engineering, and the practical skills that proved their value. But challenges remained. They were delivering supplies to a mining outpost when Roy fell ill. It started as simple fatigue. Within hours, he was burning with fever. Pale insisted on stopping immediately. Hospital is 8 hours away, Pale said, checking Roy's temperature with growing alarm. 40 degrees Celsius. Too high. Dangerous. Just need rest, Roy mumbled. His vision blurred. The world tilted. No, Pale said firmly. The young Driven's claws were surprisingly gentle as they helped Roy to the sleeping berth. You need medical attention. I'm calling ahead. Roy tried to argue, but his body refused cooperation. He drifted in and out of consciousness. Pale's voice was constant, speaking to someone on the radio. Coordinating. Problem-solving. Taking command. When Roy woke, bright lights hurt his eyes. Hospital. He turned his head and found Pale sitting beside the bed, wing draped over the chair like a blanket. The Driven's eyes were closed, but opened immediately when Roy stirred. You're awake, Pale said. Relief flooded the words. Bacterial infection. Serious, but treatable. They administered antibiotics 6 hours ago. How long was I out? Roy asked. His throat felt like sand. 14 hours, Pale said. I drove straight through. No stops. Got you here in 7 hours instead of 8. That's dangerous, Roy said weakly. You are more important than safety margins. Pale replied simply that a doctor entered, checked Roy's vitals, and pronounced him recovering well. Your friend here refused to leave your side, the doctor said, even when we tried to enforce visitation limits. Got quite aggressive about it. Roy looked at Pale. Aggressive? I merely explained that separating us would cause me significant psychological distress, Pale said, with detailed examples, and possibly minor property damage. Roy laughed, which hurt, but felt good anyway. Thank you. Family takes care of family, Pale said. You taught me that. The archivist had been documenting Pale's development the entire time. Their reports noted the unprecedented cross-species emotional bond, Pale's capacity for complex problem-solving, Leadership skills, the ability to balance driven instincts with learned human values. Subject pale represents potential evolutionary adaptation, one report stated. Enhanced cognition may have been survival mechanism, suppressed by cultural selection pressure. Now allowed to flourish, demonstrates capabilities that could reshape driven society. But not everyone celebrated this progress. Traditional driven clans maintained isolated communities. They refused contact with albino individuals. Some claimed disasters were still coming, just delayed. Others simply couldn't accept that their ancestors had been wrong for so long. One elder sent a message directly to Pale. Roy was present when it arrived. White-scaled abomination, the message began. You have corrupted human hearts and weak-minded youth. You twist science to hide truth. The ancestors see. They judge. Your existence is poison to proper order. One day, all will understand. One day, you will bring the doom you were born to carry. Pale read it without expression, then deleted it. Don't let them get to you, Roy said. They do not, Pale replied calmly. Their fear is their burden, not mine. I cannot control their beliefs. I can only control my actions. And my actions prove them wrong every day. Roy felt proud. The frightened hatchling from the desert had become this. Confident, self-assured, unshaken by hatred. The 6 apprentice albinos looked up to Pale with obvious admiration. The youngest, barely a year old, stuck close to Pale during training sessions. Why do they hate white scales? The youngster asked one day. Pale considered the question carefully. Because fear is easier than change. Because admitting error is painful. Because some people need someone to blame for random misfortune. We cannot change their minds. We can only prove, through living well, that their fear is unfounded. Will they ever accept us? Another apprentice asked. Some already have, Pale said. More will follow. Change is slow but inevitable. We are the evidence. Our existence, our success, our contributions. These matter more than ancient superstition. Roy watched from a distance as Pale taught the youngsters navigation. The white-scaled Dreven moved with natural authority now. A teacher, a leader, a living contradiction to everything traditional culture claimed about cursed ones. That evening, Roy and Pale sat outside their transport under unfamiliar stars. They were 2 systems away from Redstone now. Business was growing. Demand for their services exceeded capacity. We should expand again, Pale said. Purchase 2 more transports. Hire additional crews. Ambitious, Roy noted. Practical, Pale corrected. White-scale transport is more than business. It is proof. Proof that albino Dreven have value. That we can succeed. That we deserve to live. Every successful delivery is another argument against the curse. When did you get so wise? Roy asked. I learned from the best, Pale said. A stubborn human who refused to leave a dying hatchling in the desert. Roy smiled. Best decision I ever made. For both of us, Pale agreed. They sat in comfortable silence. 5 years since that day in the Bitter Flats. 5 years of challenges, growth, and change. Roy was older now. Gray showed in his hair. His joints ached on cold mornings. But he had never felt more fulfilled. Thank you, Pale said quietly. For everything. For my life. For teaching me that I matter. For showing me what family means. Thank you for trusting me, Roy replied. For being exactly who you are. For proving that compassion beats superstition every time. Pale's wings settled over Roy's shoulders. Comfortable. Familiar. The bond between them went deeper than species or origin. It was chosen family. The strongest kind. Tomorrow they would continue their route. Next month they would expand operations. Next year, who knew what challenges would come? But they would face everything together. Human and Dreven. Driver and navigator. Family. 5 years after the desert rescue, the Bitter Flats looked different. A stone memorial stood where Roy had found Pale. Simple words carved into red rock. Where compassion defeated superstition. Where one life changed many. Roy stood before it with Pale beside him. Both had changed dramatically. Roy's hair was almost completely gray now. Lines marked his face from years of squinting into desert sun. But his eyes still held the same determination. Pale had become magnificent. Adult Dreven stood twice the height of a human. White scales gleamed like polished marble. Wings could carry Pale across continents. But the same gentle intelligence remained in those pale blue eyes. Hard to believe it started here, Roy said. Everything starts somewhere, Pale replied. This was our beginning. They were not alone. 23 albino Dreven now lived openly across 4 colony worlds. White-scale transport had grown into a major logistics company. 15 transport, 60 employees of multiple species, and every albino Dreven who wanted work had it. But more importantly, Dreven culture had shifted. Reformist clans now outnumbered traditional ones. Albino hatchlings were protected by law. Medical care, education, opportunity, things that had been denied for 10,000 years. The council wants to meet you, Pale said. Both of us. They're ready to make a formal statement. The Dreven High Council had resisted change for years. Traditional elders maintained that the jury was still out on the curse. But time and evidence eventually won. Not a single disaster had been linked to albino Dreven. Meanwhile, white-scaled individuals excelled in every field they entered. Science, engineering, diplomacy, art. The evidence was overwhelming. The curse was fiction. The council chamber was ancient. Stone walls carved with 10,000 years of Dreven history. Roy felt small standing before 7 elder Dreven. Pale stood tall beside him, unafraid. We have called this meeting, the council leader began, to address a historic injustice. The chamber fell silent. For 100 centuries, our people believed albino hatchlings carried a curse. We abandoned them to die. Thousands upon thousands of children. We told ourselves it was necessary, that we protected the many by sacrificing the few. The elder's voice carried genuine sorrow. We were wrong. Those 3 words echoed through the chamber. Several younger, Dreven in the gallery, let out relieved sounds. Others wept quietly. The evidence is conclusive. There is no curse. There never was. We killed our children based on superstition and fear. We eliminated individuals who might have been our greatest scholars, leaders, and innovators. This is our shame, our burden to carry. The elder looked directly at Pale. To those who survived despite our cruelty, we apologize. Words cannot undo the harm, cannot bring back the lost. But we acknowledge the truth. You deserve to live. You always deserve to live. Pale's tail moved slightly. Emotional tales Roy had learned to read. Pride, relief, vindication. Furthermore, the elder continued. We established the White Scale Heritage Project, resources dedicated to finding any remaining albino individuals in isolated communities. Medical care, education, reparations for surviving family lines, and historical documentation, so future generations remember this mistake and never repeat it. The gallery erupted in discussion. Roy reached out and put a hand on Pale's shoulder. The gesture of support between them had become natural over the years. After the ceremony, they walked through the council gardens. Pale's wings were folded but relaxed. Content. How do you feel? Roy asked. Strange, Pale admitted. I wanted this recognition for years. Fought for it. But now that it's here, I feel heavy, thinking about all the ones who died, who never got this chance. Survivor's guilt, Roy said. Natural response. But you can't carry their deaths. You can only honor their memory by living well. I know, Pale said, and I will. We all will. The 23 of us represent hundreds who should have lived. We have responsibility to make the most of this gift. They reached a viewpoint overlooking the valley. Transport ships moved across the sky. Some carried white scale logos. Their company, their legacy. What happens now? Roy asked. You've achieved what we set out to do. Reform the culture. Save lives. Proven the curse was fake. What's next for you? Pale was quiet for a long moment. The younger ones look to me for leadership. They need guidance, structure, someone who understands both Dreven and human perspectives. Pale turned to Roy. But I will not abandon you. We are family. That does not change. I'm not asking you to abandon anything, Roy said gently. I'm saying you've outgrown cargo transport. You're a leader now, a symbol. You could do so much more than drive routes with an old human. You're not old, Pale said firmly. And driving routes together is not small work. Is our work. What we built together. Roy smiled. Then we continue. But maybe we adjust. Train the next generation. Let them handle the daily runs while we focus on expansion. Strategy. Building something that lasts beyond us. Partnership, Pale said. Equal. Like always. Like always, Roy agreed. They stood watching the sunset paint the desert red and gold. The same desert where Roy had heard crying 5 years ago. Where he had made a choice that changed everything. Do you ever regret it? Pale asked quietly. Stopping that day? Your life would have been simpler. Roy laughed. Regret? Pale, you're the best thing that ever happened to me. Before you, I was just going through motions. Alone. Now I have purpose. Family. A reason to wake up every morning. The crying stopped because you heard it, Pale said. You always heard me, even when others refused to listen. And you taught me that compassion is stronger than tradition. Roy replied. That doing what's right matters more than doing what's easy. They returned to their transport as stars began appearing. Tomorrow, they would meet with the apprentices. Next week, negotiations for expanding into 2 new systems. Next month, who knew what opportunities would arise? But tonight was simple. Roy prepared dinner while Pale calculated fuel costs for the expansion. Familiar routines. Comfortable partnership. The bond they had forged in desert heat and political fire. 23 albino Dreven lived because one human refused to accept that any living being deserved to die alone. Thousands more would live in the future because that choice sparked reform. Change minds. Prove that superstition could be overcome with patience, evidence, and unwavering compassion. Roy looked at Pale, who was focused on calculations with characteristic intensity. The terrified hatchling from the sand had become this. Strong, wise, free. Hey, Pale, Roy said. The Dreven looked up. Yes, I'm proud of you. Pale's eyes softened. I'm proud of us. Together, we changed the galaxy. One rescue, one choice, one family at a time. To the next 5 years, Roy said, raising his cup. To the next 50, Pale replied. They touched containers and toast. Human and Dreven. Proof that understanding transcends species. That family is chosen. That sometimes the most important moment in history starts with one person refusing to ignore a cry in the wilderness. Their story was far from over. But this chapter ended with hope, with progress, with the unshakable certainty that they would face whatever came next together. The white dragon and the human driver. Partners. Family. Forever.